What's the worst thing you've ever done? Not the petty guilt you admit to at parties, but the true, rotten thing you've buried so deep you've almost convinced yourself you're the one who forgot. The thing that, if it ever saw the light of day, would unravel you completely? Keep it in mind. It remembers. The brochure promised seclusion, a digital detox, reconnection with yourself and those you love. For Aerie, it had promised something more vital: control. She had planned this weekend down to the minute. The arrival time, the menu, the playlist for the long drive into the whispering pines of nowhere. It was a perfect, beautiful cage against the chaos of the world. And for a few glorious hours, as the sleek, modern cabin known as the Aerie came into view, she felt the familiar, seductive grip of order. That feeling died the moment they found the box. It was sitting centered on the rough-hewn dining table, a stark anomaly in the cabin's curated perfection. It was made of a dark, oiled wood, unervingly cold to the touch, and carved with spirals that seemed to shift if you didn't look at them directly. There was no note. "Ooh, a welcome gift," Chloe chirped, her natural empathy reaching out to the object. "Maybe it's local sweets." Her hand, always too quick to connect, darted out to trace the carving. "Don't." Aerie's voice was sharper than she intended. The box was wrong. It wasn't on the itinerary. "It's probably for the owners. Put it aside." "Or it's a sex thing," Ben drawled from the couch, not looking up from his phone. "No signal. Of course. We're paying a premium to be bored." Classic. His skepticism was a worn-in jacket, but Aerie saw the way his thumb kept jabbing at his screen. A nervous tell. Marcus, ever the protector, picked it up. He turned it over in his large, capable hands. "It's sealed. No latch. No hinge. It's just a solid block of wood. Weird." He shook it gently. Nothing rattled. It was impossibly, densely heavy. "A puzzle box," Isaac said. His voice hushed with a reverence that made Aerie's skin prickle. He was staring at it with an intensity that went beyond curiosity. It was hunger. "I've read about craftsmanship like this. It's flawless." "It's a paperweight," Ben said, finally tossing his phone onto the cushion beside him. "A very expensive, very pretentious paperweight. Can we open the wine now? I've been detoxing from my digital life for 11 minutes and I'm already having withdrawals." Aerie wanted to throw it into the fire. Every fiber of her being, every instinct that had built her life into a fortress of plans and lists, screamed that this object was a breach in the walls. It was an unknown variable. It was chaos. But Chloe was already cooing over it again. "Maybe it opens with a touch. You know, like a secret." She pressed her palm flat against the top. The box made a sound. A soft, wet, organic click like a bone snapping back into a socket. A seam appeared where none had been, splitting the top of the box into 4 intricate petals. They peeled back, slow and deliberate, as if moved by an invisible internal muscle. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like fresh, dark moss, were 5 small bones, sharpened to fine points. They were yellowed, ancient, talons, and beside them, a single, dried, and crumbling scroll. A silence fell, so complete it swallowed the crackle of the fireplace. The air grew thick, charged with a pressure that had nothing to do with the storm gathering outside. The cozy cabin walls seemed to lean inward. With trembling fingers, his academic detachment gone, Isaac unrolled the scroll. The symbols drawn there in a flaking, rust-colored ink were not of any language any of them knew. They were jagged, invasive, wrong. But they didn't need to be read to be understood. As Isaac's eyes scanned the page, the symbols seemed to slither behind his retinas, translating themselves directly into a voice that spoke inside his skull. His face drained of all color. He looked up, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost religious. His voice was a dry rasp, barely audible. "It says, 'Let the atonement begin.'" In the dead silence that followed, a new sound started. A faint, rhythmic scratching. It wasn't coming from the box. It was coming from inside the walls. "What does your fear smell like? Is it the metallic tang of blood, the damp rot of soil, or the sterile scent of a hospital room?" It knows. And it's already here. The scratching wasn't in the walls. It was in their minds. A dry, insectal skittering that bypassed the ears and scraped directly against the soul. Ben screamed first. A raw, unhinged sound that had nothing to do with the man who mocked everything. He clawed at his own hair, his eyes wild, fixed on something none of them could see. Make it stop. Make it look away. It's seeing me. His terror was a contagion, flooding the room. Alara's perfect plan, her beautiful control, shattered. The mental scratch became a key, turning in the lock of her deepest self. The world didn't just feel chaotic, it unfolded. The angles of the room swam, the floor tilted, and the air thickened to syrup. She couldn't breathe. She was trapped in a funhouse mirror of her own making, and the walls were her own failures, closing in. She crumpled, a silent scream trapped in her chest. Marcus, the protector, lunged for Ben, but his own fear was a sledgehammer. The sound became the heart monitor flatlining on a gurney, a sound from his past he could never outrun. He faltered, the strength draining from his limbs, replaced by the cold, familiar wash of helpless failure. He couldn't save them. He couldn't even save himself. Chloe didn't scream. She wept. The empath's connection, her greatest gift, became an open channel flooding with a pure, undiluted malice. It wasn't a presence. It was the absence of everything good, a void that screamed. She felt its infinite loneliness, its bottomless hunger, and it was breaking her into a million pieces. She was feeling its pain, and it was annihilating. And Isaac smiled, a thin, rapturous curve of his lips. The historian's obsession had found its god. The scratching was a divine language, and he was the chosen translator. His fear was the fear of a zealot meeting his maker, a terror so sublime it felt like ecstasy. The 5 bones on the table began to vibrate, humming a note that made their teeth ache. One of them levitated, quivering in the air, pointed, not at a person. It pointed at the fear it had just made manifest in the center of the room. What is the truest thing about you? Is it the love you profess, or the envy you hide? It doesn't want your lies. It wants your truth, the sharp, ugly thing you use to cut yourself in the dark. The bone talon hung in the air, humming with a vile energy. It didn't point at a person. It pointed at the space between them, at the thick, choking atmosphere of their collective dread. It was a needle, and their terror was the thread. Then it moved. A blur of ancient yellow. It didn't fly. It stitched. It plunged into the center of the room, into nothing, and tore downward. A rent appeared in the world itself. Not in a wall, not in a mirror. In the fabric of reality. Through the tear was not a place, but a feeling. A swirling vortex of every secret shame, every whispered regret, every savage thought they had ever buried. It was a window into the worst parts of themselves, made real. And from that raw, emotional wound, something began to pull itself through. A shape formed from the very air, sculpted from shared panic and individual agony. It was a thing of pure, manifested consequence. It had no eyes, but they felt its gaze. A focused, intimate attention that knew them utterly. The first game had begun. The atonement was here. What is the one memory you would carve out of your own mind with a knife if you could? The one that plays behind your eyes just before you sleep. The one that tastes like copper and regret. It knows which one it is. And it's hungry. The tear in the world pulsed like a raw, psychic wound. The entity of consequence did not move. It simply was, and in its being it made a choice. It turned its faceless attention to the source of the most delicious, potent fear. The one screaming about being seen. It reached out a limb that was not a limb, a tendril of solidified despair. Ben's screams hit a frequency beyond human hearing. It was not a sound of panic anymore. It was the sound of a soul being unspooled. The thing did not touch his body. It reached through him, into the core of him, into the dark, hidden place where he kept the thing he was most afraid of. And it pulled, a shimmering gossamer thread of pure, uncut terror. His deepest, most personal shame was drawn out of him and into the air. It glistened, a vile and beautiful trophy. Ben didn't die. He emptied. His body remained, slumped and breathing. But the light behind his eyes was gone. The cynical, fearful, chaotic core of him had been extracted. The entity held the shimmering thread of his terror for a moment. Then it consumed it. The first atonement was complete. The first soul had been paid. The bone talon clattered to the floor, inert. The other four remained on the moss, waiting. What is left of a person when their worst fear is taken? Not the memory, but the raw, shrieking nerve of it itself. An empty vessel. A warning. The silence it left behind was a new kind of sound. It was the hum of a string, freshly snapped. Ben's body sat upright. Breath fogged from his lips in the chilled air. But his eyes were open windows to a vacant house. The cynic was gone. The coward was gone. The man was a shell, polished smooth by an unimaginable theft. A single crystalline tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. It was not his tear. It was an echo, a perfect, contained droplet of the pure terror that had been ripped from him. It held his entire history of dread. It dripped from his chin, and where it hit the floorboards it did not soak in. It shattered. The sound was a universe of grief in a single note. The remaining bones on the mossy bed vibrated in sympathy. A second talon quivered, lifting its needle point into the air. It began to turn, slow and deliberate, seeking the next most potent flavor of fear. The lesson was over. The harvest was resuming. What is more yours than your own body? What would you do to keep it? The second bone talon quivered. A needle seeking the deepest vein of anguish found its target. The silent offer was not made in words, but in a cold, certain knowledge that flooded a single mind. The price was a limb, a voluntary sacrifice, a piece of the self to buy another moment of whole existence. A scream was choked back, swallowed into a guttural sob. It was the sound of a soul bargaining with itself at the edge of an abyss. A hand was offered, thrust out into the empty space. A trembling, final act of defiance and surrender. The talon moved. It was not a cut. It was an unmaking, a severing not of flesh and bone, but of concept. The very idea of the limb was neatly and completely erased from the world. Where a hand and arm had been, there was only seamless, untouched air, a void in the shape of what was lost. The body was intact, yet horrifically incomplete. The memory of the limb remained, a ghost itch in a place that no longer was. The sacrifice was accepted. The talon clattered to the floor, inert. The silence that followed was not relief. It was the sound of a new, deeper terror dawning. The cost had been made real. The economy of their suffering was now known. And the remaining bones on the dark moss waited. What is the last piece of yourself you would give to be free? Is it your name? Your love? The memory of a sunrise? The third talon rose. The offering had been made. The ritual demanded completion. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and forgotten prayers. It did not seek a limb or a life. It sought the anchor of the soul, a single, beautiful memory. The first true joy, pure and uncorrupted, was pulled to the surface of a mind, played behind the eyes like a precious, fragile film. The choice was not a choice. It was an extraction. The memory was taken, not forgotten, but stolen. Its light devoured by the hovering shard of bone. The warmth of it turned to ash in the chest. The face of a first love became a smudge of nothing. The sound of a laugh was erased from the universe. Where that joy had lived, a permanent hollow cold rushed in. The entity shuddered, satiated. The remaining bones turned to dust. The tear in the world sealed itself with a sound like a final, dying sigh. It was over. The survivors were left in the silent cabin, whole in body but scavenged of spirit, forever paying a debt they never knew they owed. The price of atonement is eternal. Subscribe to the Veil of Secret. You never know what we'll uncover next.